I'd like to introduce Shaun Spiers and Sarah Mukherjee. Shaun is from the Green Alliance. He's the Executive Director of the Green Alliance, and Sarah is the CEO of IEMA. So maybe you could just briefly introduce yourselves, and then I'll just talk about the election. But first, Sarah, if you'd just like to introduce yourself and IEMA.
Brilliant. Thanks, Wayne. Thanks very much indeed for having us on this really interesting and very, very important webinar, talking about something that we'll probably come into that in a minute, but something that can be a bit of a Cinderella subject when it comes to talking about sustainability and the green economy. So I'm Sarah Mukherjee, as you said, CEO of the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment, and we are the professional institute for anyone interested in or working in sustainability and the environment. We have 22,000 members in more than 105 countries, so we work in the UK but also internationally, and have experts in circular economy, and indeed do a lot of policy work around that as well, with our own standing group and publications. And great to be here. Thank you.
And Shaun.
Hi everyone, yeah, I'm Shaun Spiers. I work for Green Alliance, which is a think tank working for ambitious leadership on the environment. We've had a circular economy task force with businesses for about 12 years. It's our longest standing business task force, and we see a real opportunity in the next few years to put this agenda centre stage. I think more generally, we're beginning to adopt the UN language of a triple crisis: climate and nature, obviously, but also resource extraction, which is responsible for so much of our climate change and nature loss.
Great. Okay, couple of housekeeping points. If you've got questions, please put them in the Q&A, not in the chat. Put them in the Q&A, and then people can vote on which questions they'd like to float to the top. And then just a comment about the election. So for various reasons, both myself and Sarah are bound by pre-election period rules. So we acknowledge there is an election going on. We'll be talking about principles. We won't specifically be talking about policies, certainly not party political policies. Shaun is less bound by those rules, so may wish to reflect on those policies if that becomes appropriate, but we won't be commenting on them per se. So with that out of the way, we're going to have a chat about circular economy. We're going to talk about four major themes: carbon and consumption. So the planet bit first, and then we'll talk about the wider economy stuff, resilience, supply chains, cost of living, and jobs in the general economy. So maybe if I can start by just having a brief chat about carbon and consumption, and the role that circular economy plays in that particular sphere. And really, what I want to kind of tease out is the role that circular economy plays to maybe harder to abate things, and also why we never talk about it at the COPs, why it's just not an issue that's really that present. So I don't know if anybody wants to start with that.
Do you know, as you were saying that, I was thinking about, and without wishing to sound too esoteric as we start off, but about working class culture. You know, I come from a working class background. The culture is very much around new, box fresh trainers. What's the new thing? What's brand new out of the showroom, brand new iPhone or tech. And I think that's almost where I start in thinking about the circular economy, because we've got it the wrong way around. We now have relationships, very transactional relationships with consumers, with shareholders, up and down the supply chain, which is all about how do I get it for the least, and how do I, have this moment in time where I'm dealing with you, and then I move on to something else, whoever you are in my circle. And that has to completely change, because as you quite rightly say, we're running out of stuff to dig out of the ground. We're running out of stuff and places to put it into when we finished with it. And I think there's a really easy straight line to draw across the whole sustainability conversation, which is around partnership. and to change that very transactional model into much more one around working with your supply chain, working with your customers, and also working to reduce the impact. So it kind of makes sense if you say, well, if you use less stuff, it's going to cost you less. Kind of really, and I know we'll talk a little bit about the upfront costs about investment for a more circular economy in a minute. But you, of course, if you don't use as much stuff, it won't cost as much, and in the long term, you and customers and the planet will see the benefit. It's just culturally that is a really difficult thing to get over the line before you've even started with the business organisation.
Well, come on to that actually in our discussion around cost of living. Maybe it touches upon some of this that theme. Shaun, do you have any? You must have done work at Green Alliance on carbon and the relationship between circular economy and harder to abate carbon emissions.
Yeah, we have, and I would say there needs to be even more research. But we need a national materials data hub, for instance, which has been promised for some time, which would provide some of the data that's missing on this. But one specific sector which we did work in is the construction sector, where we said you could reduce material use by 35% using existing techniques. And as we have a kind of national drive towards circularity, then obviously things will become cheaper, processes will become easier. But even with existing techniques, we reckon we could reduce resource use in construction, where there's an awful lot of waste, by 35%. And of course, that would have an impact then on economic efficiency and productivity as well. And I think that's the narrative that we can develop on circularity, I think, is that this is about jobs, better standard of living, reduced costs for consumers, etc. It's not a hair shirt environmentalism. It's actually just a sensible thing that's going to make individuals and households better off and help the economy.
I mean, I like that. It's not about hair shirtism. I think that's right, and the circular economy can help in that aspect. And Sarah, just to get back to your point, so I wonder if there's a difference between, and I don't know the answer to this necessarily, but if there's a difference between reducing consumption-based carbon emissions and reducing consumption. Do you know what I mean? So are we asking people to be less wealthy or less worse off, or are we asking them to consume differently?
Yeah, I think it's the latter, isn't it? I mean, and even now it's funny. I was talking to one of our members who works just below the C-suite, and even now she said, I'm quite surprised that in 2024 I'm finding it difficult to make an argument to the C-suite about why it's important to be sustainable or think about sustainability. But a sustainability audit, actually, to Shaun's point, will throw up a lot of things that you're doing that you're just chucking money down the drain, basically, sometimes quite literally, in terms of your business practices, and just thinking more mindfully about how you can reduce your energy input, your carbon input. A lot of that will come with, we all see office blocks lit up like Christmas trees all the way through the year when nobody's sitting there. That'd be a very good example. Why is it better for business? Well, there are new profit streams. I mean, particularly in more mature sectors, there are new from developing services that support resale and repair. You reach new customer groups that you might not do. You're reducing volatility in your supply chains as well, because back to that partnership model, you're working in partnership with suppliers that you're supporting and developing, and they will be more loyal to you, and so it will be far less volatile. And you're improving your customer interaction and loyalty as well. If you've got I mean, I have a washing machine that is older than the kids, and one is mine as an actual doctor now, and I have I know the guy who comes to repair it. He comes every year, comes out, they fit new parts, and that is I am staying with that company because I go back to them for all the other stuff, and I have done for the last 20 years. So you've got a generational conversation, and I go and buy other stuff when I need it from that company. So that is, in a very, very fragile and very quick transactional market, you can't buy that sort of customer loyalty unless you offer those sort of services. So there's a host of benefits that you can get from
Yeah.
thinking.
Yeah, so we have at ReLondon, everyone's got their kind of what does circular economy mean, and they have various different people have different models to demonstrate that, and they'll all essentially be around the same thing. In ReLondon, we have these 5 business models, which I guess essentially are making stuff from recycled product, making stuff recyclable, design for durability, which is to your point, servitization, and the sharing economy. So, anything that kind of generally falls within those business models, we would say is a circular economy business, and we probably support it. And so, I guess going back to the point about carbon, just before we move on, the things that we are talking about here are like food, clothing, construction, things that are hard to abate by flicking a switch. Not that it's that easy, of course, but moving over to renewable energy. These are things that require behavior change. So I think that's why I'm attracted to Shaun's point about it not being hair shirt, because people have to change their behavior, and we have to make it easy for them to do so. Shaun, yeah.
I mean, there is a public policy need here to kind of have proper joined up public policy. Sarah said it's been a Cinderella in governments, the circular economy, and it clearly is. It's been buried for years in DEFRA. It's been made to be the kind of reduced to the waste agenda, which is an important part of it, but is only one small part of it.
The end of pipe of it, really.
Exactly, yeah. And so we need to get it into DESNZ, the Department of Business and Trade, Treasury, obviously, Cabinet Office, and so on. And then you'll find a whole lot of policies that can make this easier for people. I mean, there are obvious things on taxation about not charging VAT on repair, where most of the cost is labour rather than, and people already pay VAT on the original product. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that government could do to encourage this agenda, and up till now it kind of hasn't. Not partly because, as I say, it's been seen as to be just part of the waste agenda. It needs to be part of the economic and cost of living agenda as well.
Yeah, I guess there's a certain amount of distance that you can go with circular economy business models, but you definitely need behaviour change. So there has to be a symmetrical relationship, if you like, between business, government, and citizens and local governments. It cannot be, one side of that doing all of the work. If I was listening, by the way, to your friend Shaun, who does the PM program, Evan Davis.
Evan Davis, yeah.
Yeah, and he had a discussion around this agenda, especially in the light of the European elections and the possibility of Green New Deal policies becoming maybe taking a back seat. And the guests were talking about the importance of cities, below national governments, the importance of cities enacting these kinds of things. And that's, of course, where people live. And that's where businesses operate. So these kinds of business models and at the citizen, at the community level, at the local government level, I suspect will become even more important in driving this agenda forward. I mean, would you agree broadly with that as a thesis?
Totally. Sorry if I can just jump in. And it goes back to that point that both you and Shaun have raised about agency. I mean, people just feel that they have very little agency in their lives at the moment. You can't pull a lever and nothing really happens. This gives you, and I think if you talk to people who bought in recycling originally, and we had very high recycling, I know they have dropped off, but very high recycling rates at one point, people felt that they could do a small thing which made a big difference. And we know that there've been a lot of articles in the press and investigations about how actually some of this stuff ends up in landfill and whatever, but that was the point. And I think it's the same with the circular economy, particularly if you work at city or regional levels.
Yeah.
There's a communitarian sense of people being able to get together. People hardly know their neighbours these days, but ability to work together, and we see parallels in regional energy schemes as well, people working together to a common goal. It makes them feel much better about their community, as well as saving reducing carbon and saving resources.
Okay, let's move the conversation on a little bit then. Let's go to resilience and supply chains. And I guess the proposition here is, in times of this particular time in geopolitical uncertainty and supply chain cost, raw material volatility, cost volatility, the circular economy as a theory would imply that supply chains are shortened as you bring things, as you mine materials that you have within your economy circulating. So I guess the question which I'm setting you up for is, do you agree with that proposition? And do you agree that circular economy, in theory, is something that can help with resilience?
For a start, yeah, not only help, but it's going to be absolutely essential. And although I said we don't want to be hair shirt about it, everybody can have better lives, etc., we know that we're sort of sailing into stormy weather in terms of the immediate impacts of climate change, and also a less and less certain world. We saw that with the hike in gas prices after the invasion of Ukraine. So it really is imperative on the governments to ensure that we do have resilience, and that includes shorter supply chains. I think it also does include a degree of demand management, which shouldn't make people's lives harder. It should actually reduce their bills, make it easier to save energy, etc. But if we carry on using energy and water and other resources as if they're absolutely limitless, then we shouldn't be surprised if we end up with a few kind of hikes in prices when climate change starts to bite or the world gets uncertain. So
Shaun, can you tell us a bit about the work you've been doing on critical raw materials?
Yeah, critical raw materials, we reckon that you can reduce the need for critical raw materials by about 50% if we're serious about demand use. But also there's a bigger role for recycling critical raw materials, which includes kind of relatively small things like don't have disposable vapes, which have precious materials in them.
Right.
But there's usually much bigger aspects of this. And then we reckon that by 2050, we could be 80 to 100% independent on critical raw materials.
I'm just going to ask you a stupid question for the sake of, obviously I know the answer to this question, but for the sake of our audience, can you tell me what are critical raw materials? Do you define it? And where are those materials largely, where do we find them as consumers?
Well, yeah, I'm so glad you asked me that question. I'm not sure I can define it, but it's things like cobalt and lithium and it's the materials we need for electric vehicles, for wind turbines, for the green transition. And there are, as well as being environmental aspects of this and economic aspects, there are serious human rights aspects as well, because a lot of them are mined in terrible conditions using child labor in DRC and countries like this. And so there is also a kind of serious human rights aspect of this. We need to clean up supply chains as well as shorten them and make sure that we're not dependent on sort of the Uyghur community, slave labor in Uyghur communities in China for our solar panels and this sort of thing. We do need to look at this in the round. It's going to become increasingly important.
And Sarah, are your members involved in supply chain management at all? Is that sort of thing you see?
Yes, sorry, wait, yes. And to Shaun's point, or you could almost argue everything's a critical raw material because it will have either water impact, pesticides, if you're thinking about cotton, the amount of water that takes up, food and farming, very resource intensive in parts of the world that are increasingly fragile. We've seen that in terms of volatility around chocolate, coffee, olive oil. There are very few things you can think of that aren't in some way either critically affected by climate change or resource management or critical themselves. But yes, and interestingly, the Chartered Institute of Waste Management thinks that there are going to be about 75,000 more jobs in the next few years, which they could identify as waste management jobs, not just the ones you would be able to obviously think about, but things like circular economy communications, strategic implementation, program management, all the things that you need, but also around the circular economy. And back to that point about bottom line, there are there are business models you can use, and for example, MUD or MUD jeans. I don't know jeans. I'm very much not a fashionista. They have a premium price of 129 quid, I think it is, for a pair of jeans, but you can also lease them. Rico, the toner people, they have a toner compactor program which has enabled them to recycle some waste toner. That's reduced their raw materials expenditure by about £300,000 a year. So these are all models you can think about that are not only work as businesses, but also work to reduce upfront costs as well.
Yeah, I mean, big shout out to Nudie Jeans, actually, who I bought a pair of Nudie Jeans for at premium maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and they have a lifetime guarantee for repair.
Exactly.
And
Patagonia is the same. Yeah.
took them to the Nudie shop. 2 weeks later, they came back immaculately repaired. So yeah, shout out to Nudie Jeans.
Yeah.
And others, yes.
Yeah, other jeans are available.
Yeah, so I mean, what kind of skills do you think? I mean, either of you answer this question. Do you think that we need to develop then in the economy to maximize, I guess, mining of resources and bring those and shorten those supply chains? And it could be anything, couldn't it? I mean, right across the supply chain, from food to manufacturing to repair, I guess.
We have, sorry, I'll jump, if I may jump in, Shaun, on this. We have a skills crisis. I mean, green jobs, or roles that you could identify as green jobs are increasing by a factor faster than jobs without the necessary green skills, and yet we are simply not enabling the infrastructure to take place to support that green skills and training. Just a very basic one, welders. If you look at all the heat maps of where we're really short on green skills, welders, because you need welders to weld lots of stuff to lots of other stuff. Not really, this is not an area of the economy that we're really laying out the red carpet in terms of our green skills or green skills requirement. Electricians is another one. We're probably 20,000 electricians short for EVs, so EV charging. So there are a lot of skills you might not think that are green skills that we absolutely need for circular economy.
We'll maybe move on to jobs now then. I mean, I know that, various, Shaun, Green Lights have done some work on this. We've done some work on this. RAP have done some work on this. I think we had a report just not too long ago that said by 2030, circular economy jobs could be around 500,000 within London from a base of around 250,000, so doubling by the end of the decade. And we tried to define that as being direct, indirect, and kind of ancillary too. So, and the thing is, I think the green job definition tends to be around retrofit and energy. And then there's all these other jobs in the circular economy, which are probably not sort of captured within that green job definition. And therefore, it seems to me there potentially is going to be a skills gap around those hard to abate emissions and that behavior change in those business models. I mean, do you guys have any feel for, what you see as the emerging sectors within the circular economy? Silence.
Yes, I was going to say, okay, so well, obviously renewable energy specialists, there'll be I mean, the reason I sort of slightly hesitate is that I think there's anything that you can think of that is a job, you probably need one of those, which also has a specialism within circular economy. So materials scientists, chemists, engineers, environmental regulators, drivers and loaders, circular economy specialists, and as I said, all the education, comms, corporate affairs. I mean, got me just thinking now. I mean, as Shaun said, why has the circular economy? Why has it been so difficult to get a broad pickup? I think partly because it sits across several government departments.
Yeah.
No politics here, just principles. But it sits within DEFRA at the moment. But actually, hooks in probably 3 or 4 different government departments, and we know that that is traditionally very difficult to get departments to talk on anything really across departments. But also I think the solutions are sometimes quite specific and quite niche. You know, you cannot have a one-size-fits-all solution for the British economy. It has to be sector by sector, and maybe that's added to the complexity.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. We looked at core jobs, which are probably jobs you would imagine would be more waste management, and the thing is that as you become more circular, those kind of waste management jobs decline as you move kind of further up the hierarchy, and then the jobs around reuse, recycling, and repair start to grow. But then we have enabling and indirect, and it's almost as big as you want to define it, because as the circular economy grows, everybody's captured within that in a way, and I think that's the interesting thing. Shaun, what work did you do on jobs? Was that around waste in particular, or?
No, we did work with RAP, and then we updated it relatively recently, and came quite easily to 450,000 new jobs in the circular economy, but particularly looking at it was a couple of years ago when levelling up was still a thing. Remember that, and it was looking at more disadvantaged areas of the country. But I think there's a particular problem with a kind of lack of imagination on what a properly circular economy would mean, and the new sorts of jobs that would throw up. So at the moment, people think about how can an existing business become more circular, but there's a different question about what new businesses would come on stream if the UK government was as serious about circularity as, say, the Dutch government has become. I went to a fascinating seminar about 5 years ago about circular agriculture in the Dutch embassy. We don't talk about circular agriculture. We talk about circular economy as a kind of relatively niche area. But if you're serious about circularity, it does embrace the whole of the economy. And that's why, in a way, we need to get this into the Treasury. There is some interest in the Treasury, but there's a real lack of serious research on the macroeconomic impact of a big increase in circularity, because we just don't have the data or indeed the imagination to think about it, I think, at the moment.
Well, maybe sort of towards the end of our bit of the webinar, I can ask you, Sarah and I probably can't talk about it, maybe we can. What needs to happen over the next 5 years in order to accelerate that transition? Maybe we could think in policy terms. I'll just finally then switch to the cost of living, and then we'll kind of have a look to see how the Q&A is doing, and maybe start to pick up some of the questions there. I guess this is fairly, to me, this seems like a no-brainer. I mean, traditionally, the more kind of direct aspects of circular economy, those ones that you referenced, Sarah, around sharing, second-hand, good quality second-hand goods, redistribution of food, all those kinds of things. It seems to me this is probably an agenda that's somehow been missed in the cost of living crisis. But does anybody want to kind of just talk briefly about how circular economy kind of relates to cost of living, or how it can relate?
Well, I mean, there's no end of research on it. A lot of it's produced by RAP. So RAP, I think, reckons the average family loses £800 a year through food waste. I mean, how you can reduce it from 800 to nothing? Just thinking of my own family, I think that'd be quite hard. But you can obviously do things to reduce food waste. They reckon that you could save £200, £80 a year from reuse, and I think that would be much easier if we just made it easier to reuse things, and that's partly, as I say, down to things like VAT. But there's also, I think, the last thing I'd say is there's a really disappointing argument about sort of nannyism in this. So one thing we absolutely know is that the EU Eco-Design Directive has made equipment more efficient. I'm not sure how much you'd say that's circular, but it does save families a good £100 a year in terms of more efficient washing machines or hoovers or whatever. And that's reduced to Daily Mail campaign, they're taking our noisy high suction hoovers away. And the UK is now falling behind some of the EU progress on eco design. So again, it's about looking at it really, from every aspect, and that will save families money.
Yeah, and I think it's to a certain extent it's really back to the future on this, isn't it? I was my nan rented a telly. You never thought about buying a new telly. You had a rediffusion telly, and the bloke came and fixed it when something went wrong, and that was normal. There wasn't any. It was the whole idea of having your own new stuff in terms of white goods or tech is a relatively new concept. I said one of our questioners said, "Why do you want to buy a pair of £100 jeans when you could just buy one from a charity shop?" Absolutely.
Is that having a pop at me there?
No, but no, I think probably both of us, because I mentioned the example as well. But it's a good shout. I mean, again, it's now there is a wealth of. We certainly, we're certainly not short of stuff to rebuy and reuse. But also it's a business model that builds in redundancy and builds in a kind of terminal life for a particular product, which we have to get out of the view of that you're somehow a better person if you somehow a better person if you have a new model of a phone, and that's what you hang your whole personality on. And so that's why I think the cultural bit is just as important. As we have a whole culture based on new stuff, we need to work out how we use those nudge tactics to support people. But you're right, cost of living crisis, there are millions of people in the country who don't have that option, don't even have they haven't got the bandwidth or the option to be able to do that. And so anything we can do to support people to make the difference, which is often very marginal, it's 5 or 10 quid at the end of the week, has to be a good thing.
I agree. I mean, I think the kind of beauty of the circular economy in a way, and those circular economy business models, is the plethora of services and goods and opportunities to engage in the circular economy. In many ways, people engage without even kind of realizing it, and sometimes I think that's the best way. If you're, I mean, someone will tell me that using your Kindle is probably worse than reading a book, or maybe you have to use your Kindle 200 times to gain the benefit of not buying a book. The point is that there was dematerialization that occurred in that business model, and people adopted it because it was simply more convenient or better, or they found it better than the, in quotes, linear alternative. And I think those kinds of business models are, in a way that I find beauty in those kinds of business models. And certainly things like unpackaged shops, where you can go to a shop and buy exactly what you need for that day or that week, and not have to buy a predetermined amount that maybe leads to wastage or maybe unaffordable on that particular day. So, there are lots of opportunities, I think, here to engage in a cost of living way that saves families money and allows them to kind of survive when you've got high food inflation and that kind of stuff.
But again, Wayne, it would be helped by. I'm sorry to sound like a sort of muscular statist, but it would be helped if the state also made manufacturers pay the full cost of their waste rather than externalizing it, because then until that happens, there's not a level playing field.
No, I mean you're absolutely right. I just did a project with my daughter. She had to give a speech on a topic. She decided to choose textiles. So we looked at the fact that cheap textiles, cheap clothing, and you could extend this to food, has impacts both socially and environmentally in other parts of the world. So there's no such thing as cheap clothing. It's just, it's basically just brands or manufacturers kind of getting out of their, paying the full cost, the full price, both socially and environmentally, of what they're producing. And that can't be right. And that, interesting, back to your point, Sarah, again, that if you go back, a few generations, that just didn't happen. clothing was cherished, it was repaired, it was handed down, or you would, you know, my favorite example of this is modular clothing, you know, where you'd have a collar that is detachable, you know, or cuffs that were detachable. The bits that wore out were minimized, and you could, you know, replace them easily anyway.
And shoe cobblers, you know, you'd have a pair of shoes that would last for. I mean, the trouble is we end up sounding like we're a kind of, you know, Brighton Radio 2, or if we're not careful, it was it was like when I was a dad, you know.
I won't mention my shoes. It might get Alex to moan about me again, but they are repairable anyway. So yes.
But I think but I suppose the point, the point behind that is the culture has to come in lockstep, and I agree with Shaun about you have to have a framework, a regulatory framework that drives the best and reduces, and so the externalities you're paying for as an organisation, but you also have to have a sense of how you're going to shift the culture as well. And it's kind of happening. I mean, certainly, you know, vintage is much more a thing. There are lots of people now buying and selling clothes directly through apps. You know, Vinted, I know is one, but lots of others are available. There is rental, and you know, the bikes that you use in London. There's rental bikes. There's lots of those models around. The question is, how do you can move that from something that's fairly niche into something that's normal? That's the norm. Yeah. And I also do think it's easier in a town. It's not as easy in rural areas or market towns to do that, because you just don't have the density of people.
Interesting, yeah, that's an interesting. I mean, in London, we've taken the concept of neighbourhoods and tried to apply neighbourhoods, circular economy to a neighbourhood level, which I guess is more of a town. Really, it's kind of that size of population, either looking at jobs or SMEs or particular materials, and then getting the community to engage with you. Going, you know, below that, I'm not, you know, we don't really have much experience. So it's an interesting concept. How would that translate? And maybe that's something to do with, you know, regenerative food or regenerative agriculture. I just wanted, before we kind of go over to have a look at some of the questions, of which I'm pleased to see there were many. So do keep on putting them in the Q&A, and do vote for your favourite questions. We'll float them. They'll float up to the top, and then and we can have a go at discussing those points. But I guess without being political, because we can't be, well, Shaun can be, but Sarah and I certainly can't be. Can we maybe think about what needs to happen over the next 5 years? And you know, I can think about London, but what needs to happen over the next 5 or so years, or maybe beyond the end of the decade, in order to make this happen? I mean, Shaun referenced Holland, and you could also probably reference Finland in the EU, but I actually don't think, you know, despite all of the policies the EU have kind of implemented or proposed around circular economy, there's not been a massive take-up of circular economy in Europe, apart from maybe those 2 countries, which are relatively small in population terms. France probably has done a bit more, I think, actually, and you know, Germany has, but you know, we're now starting to see some political reaction against that. So what needs to happen in this country in policy terms to kind of move us beyond you know, our closest counterparts over the next 5 or so years? Maybe Shaun, you could have a go answering that, and then we'll backfill.
Yeah, I think there's a relatively clear kind of menu of things. I mentioned cross-government working, so don't bury it in DEFRA. I think a serious plan. So the current government had a plan, but it didn't implement it. There wasn't a follow through. So a plan which you actually follow through. You need incentives, so you need to use the tax system, which in an election is sort of off limits. Nobody really wants to talk about tax except how they're not going to raise it. But at the moment, we have a tax system that disincentivizes the sort of behaviors we need and incentivizes the sort of behaviors we don't need. We need serious producer responsibility, so that producers aren't externalizing the impact of their production and so on. So I think there's a whole lot of stuff that we know. I think the most important thing in a way is that it gets into the political bloodstream, and so there is a it's probably not too controversial to say that everybody's expecting a Labour government. There is a reference, a passing reference to circular economy in the Labour manifesto. Labour is committed to reducing waste by moving to a circular economy. That's all it says. It's more than there was in 2017, more than there was in 2019. So it's good that it's there. It's in the section on making the UK a clean energy superpower, which is sort of seems slightly irrelevant. There's much longer passage in the Liberal Democrats manifesto, for instance, which is in the section on the business and jobs, which is sort of where I'd like it, sort of centrally. But we do know, to be fair to the current government, the Conservatives don't mention it in their manifesto, but there is work going on. There's work going on in the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, which an incoming government could take on. And we do know that Steve Reed, the shadow environment secretary, is very interested in this agenda. We also know that Rachel Reeves was interested in it when she chaired the Business Select Committee. So I'm reasonably hopeful that an incoming government, although it's going to have an awful lot to do, will give this a bit of a lease of life, which, to be honest, it hasn't had. I joined Green Alliance 7 years ago, and there was a sense then that the current government had an enthusiasm for this agenda, but it was dissipating. A lot of businesses had started working on it. They were putting money behind it, and they were saying, where is the government leadership? And in my 7 years at Green Alliance, there was a brief moment when Michael Gove kind of grasped the agenda. But on the whole, it's been sort of forgotten, and it will need some serious political leadership from whoever wins the election. And that's so without that, it's just not really going to happen. And the last thing I say is that the businesses we work with, the reason that Green Alliance has been able to keep a circular economy task force going for 12 years is there are businesses that are really, really up for this agenda, see the benefits of it, and want some support from central government that they can see its economic value. They're not doing it, they're not charities. They can see its economic value for the bottom line, as well as business, I think, do want to do good as well. But it does need a bit of heft from government.
Yeah, I completely agree. There are lots of businesses. I think Shaun and I both work with businesses who have, they've got the memo. They totally understand why this is a good idea, but also the need for an ambassador for this in either in a future administration or in a kind of advisory role that really does see the benefit. It's not a sexy subject, is it? Often, the circular economy. So it's not, you can't get that on a TikTok very easily. But we do need someone who can really see and clearly articulate the economic, financial, and cultural benefits. And there's been some really interesting questions and comments I'm having a look at around, this really is an opportunity. It would be an opportunity to decentralise, to work on a community basis. I mean, as I said, with the proviso of that's not quite as easy when you're outside cities to do that, because you don't have the mass of people to be able to do it. Apart from that, yes, it's an opportunity to rethink how people are living, as well as what we're doing with the stuff that we've got.
I mean, for my non-political pounds worth, I guess to both your points, I would maybe point out that Chris Skidmore published a net zero review, and within that review was a really good recommendation to create a circular economy task force, but across government. So there's obviously a recommendation, and a realization within those people who are thinking about this stuff that it needs so-called transversal government action. And of course it does, because as we're to the name of this webinar, it's the economy, stupid. So it cannot sit in any one department, and I don't think that's particularly party political or controversial. It's just a product of the fact that this covers the economy, and we're trying to transition and change the economy into something which is more circular. So by its nature, it needs buy-in from champions and from departments. It cannot sit in one particular department. That is tricky. That is really tricky.
And it can't sit in Whitehall either way. As you know, sort of better than most from ReLondon, there's a big role here for metro mayors and decentralised combined authorities as local authorities to push this agenda as well, and of course that evolves.
Yeah, I mean, I would say It's about cities, you know. However, I've always said to a certain extent, however, whatever the government wants to do, just don't get in our way. It'd be great if you could help us. Give us more power, give us more devolution. Is that too political? Or maybe getting a bit political there, but you know, cities, it's a constant issue with a city like London and other cities when you compare those cities to American or European counterparts, the relatively little power that they have. But you know, that's where people live. This is where money is made. This is where the economy works. Let us get on with it. I think cities will become very important in the next epoch, the next 10 or 15 years, as we start to, you know, really kind of get to the nitty-gritty with some of these terms politically. And what they mean for us. Okay, well, we've got about 10 minutes. It probably seems a good time to have a look at some of the questions. The first question that kind of I think cuts the heart of it was around economic growth. If I can just find it. There's a really good question here about. I can't say it now, but basically the question is circular economy consistent with the ambition for GDP growth, for economic growth?
I think with some politica, Philip, you talked about new revenue or profit streams that the circular economy can offer. Given the world we live in is GDP growth obsessed, which comes from selling more stuff, do you see circular economy as fully compatible with economic growth as we currently measure it?
Anybody want to hazard a guess at that?
I go back to we did a bit of research on this and found it quite hard to find the answer because there hasn't been a lot of macroeconomic research on circular economy. Pragmatically, this is a non-answer. But pragmatically, if we do have a new government whose number one mission is economic growth and we want to sell them the circular economy, we're not going to do it by saying this is a degrowth strategy. So I think it's got to be good for the economy and sustainability. So it is, the frame is green growth. And I know a lot of people hate the idea of green growth and think it's a contradiction in terms, but practically there are clearly ways in which taking a more circular model will increase productivity, which is the major thing that's holding the UK economy back. If you know, there's normally productivity is seen in terms of skills, but you could see productivity also in terms of resources. Using fewer resources will increase your productivity and will be good for the economy. So there are profound economic questions at play here, and there's a profound kind of lack of knowledge because we have no models around the world for what a truly circular economy means. But I don't think I would enter the argument by saying this is a degrowth strategy. I think that's the way to just have doors shut in government. This is a strategy for a more productive and less wasteful economy.
Wow. Yeah. If you, I mean, without wishing to sound too political or depolitical at all, if you're spending less money on staff, you've got money left to spend on other stuff like investment or looking at other ways of supporting your business to be more productive in a good way. And it's I mean, I feel myself getting to the kind of literal limits of what I can say in a pending period. But yes, I agree with Shaun.
But even Kate Raworth's book on donut economics doesn't say this is an agenda for degrowth. This is an agenda for kind of the right sort of growth. And I think circularity is compatible with that. I
think we use the word thrive, although I guess we haven't really defined what that means in GDP terms. But thrive, it certainly seems to me that a circular economy has to be an economy where we all thrive. It cannot be anything other than that. Otherwise, we're literally talking about we're talking about going back in time, and that's not it's not an argument. So how that relates to growth, I don't know. I think Shaun is right. We do need to do some thinking and research about that. And but at the moment, none of the major political parties and again, not being party political here, are talking about anything other than going for growth, and it's a growth agenda. So we need to make sure that that growth is green. There's a good question here from Alex again. Alex, Rich out of my jeans. What extent has the circular economy concept been co-opted by capital as greenwash? My view of C is that it should be decentralized community-led initiatives, etc., etc.
Yeah, I think there is, and we talked a lot, we work with a lot of our individual members and members in organisations who are terrified of doing anything in case they get eviscerated in social media for having got something or saying something that isn't quite right. I think there's a real danger that you end up with a kind of catatonic state in this space and in sustainability altogether by insisting that the perfect, the good is the enemy of the perfect. So what you have, any forward motion is surely better than nothing at all. And I think there is a real danger, talking more broadly, not just about businesses, that we are already disconnecting. I said, I was brought up in the white working class community. Yet most people in that community think what we do is, I won't use the word nonsense, shall we say? That's not the word they use. Communities of colour get very disenfranchised by this whole kind of, as you said, that hair shirtism, Shaun. We have to be really careful. Back to the point about who do we want? Do we want to engage everybody and bring everybody along on this, or do we end up with a situation where you've got people who are really into it and most people are just very disconnected because those people vote and politicians see what those people say through their MPs' mailbag. So I think we need to applaud when people are trying to do the right thing, however hesitant and sometimes missteps. We're all human. We all get stuff wrong on a regular basis, but celebrating the wins and supporting and encouraging people to do more, I think has to be the right way to go. I do think the point about that someone else made about are we relying too much on the third sector? I think that is true as well, though, as well. We shouldn't expect charities to be doing a lot of this, the heavy lifting of this.
Yeah, can I have a go at this? So the question mentioned self-build, and my background is in the co-op movement. I've spent quite a lot of my life learning, speaking the language of status quo corporatism. I've been learning the language of status quo corporatism. But to be honest, we need both. We need kind of vibrant grassroots initiatives. But if we are half serious about the idea that this is the decade of action on climate, this is our last best chance. The parliament we're electing now, which will go to the end of this decade, is the last chance we have to get on track to net zero and restoring nature without kind of major disruption and much higher costs in the future. And we are going to need corporates to help us with that. So I don't think corporates can do it all, but we're not going to dismantle capitalism in the next 5 years. So if we can sell this agenda to the status quo, as well as nurturing the green shoots that will perhaps lead us to a more sustainable system, that's what we're going to have to do. So that sort of sounds a little bit conservative, but that's I don't. Anyway, that's what I think.
Well, I mean, corporates are clearly part of the problem, a big part of the problem, but they're also the solution. We're not going to do this by going around corporates. They have to change. They have to change their business models and their business practices. And to a certain extent, they've got to change them in a way that is compatible with making money. That's the capitalist system that we live in. So, we either have to do this by design, I've said this before, I think, and it's a bit dark, or we do it by disaster. And disaster means that solutions are imposed upon us. And I find that quite depressing. So I would much rather opt to work with whoever wants to, work and change and develop new circular economy business models. But obviously the danger in all of these things that people can use this as greenwashing. We do have to be aware of that. All of our organizations do. But working with those companies who are genuinely into transforming what they do and their practices is, I think, the way in which we go a large way to solving this problem. And there are some very good companies out there who we have worked with and continue to work with, who it's, I'm proud to work with. So, and this shows the way in which you can move forward. If any of you kind of did environmental studies at university, you'll be asked, can capitalism save itself from impending environmental disaster? Discuss. It would be an undergraduate question. Well, this for me is the answer. The circular economy is the way in which capitalism, which our society can save itself. So anyway, on that bombshell.
And also, I mean, sorry, just to build on that,
Yeah.
I do think that there are ways that organisations can move much faster than governments. If you I mean, you have to have the right conversations with the right people in that organisation, but they can move really quickly when there's been a decision made in a way that, I mean, if you look at the private sector or private organisations in COP compared to the COP process, they can be very agile. And I've been to more COPs than I care to remember, but it's gone very much from government, international government leading to now there are private sector CEOs who turn up and say, why aren't you moving fast enough? Why aren't you challenging us fast enough? You should be doing this. We shouldn't be having to tell you. And that's a very different conversation from the one we were having even 15 years ago.
Indeed. Okay. I think we've reached our allotted time pretty much. I will give you a minute or two just to sum up if you like, and then yeah, we'll say goodbye. So I think Sarah, if I can just come to you, just final thoughts maybe.
Sure, but 30 seconds in. Well, first of all, thank you for everybody, and it's always a real pleasure to see so much talk in the web, in the chat, and so many questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them, but I think there is, we always have to finish on a high, and I do think there's a real opportunity for the circular economy to be, as a concept, to really be a game changer. I mean, I hate to use those cliches, but when it comes to moving towards a more sustainable future, but we need a real cross-government commitment and an ambassador who can articulate it very clearly as well, and the culture piece, which is the really difficult thing, I think.
Right, thanks. Shaun.
I agree with all that. There was a question about who the ambassador should be. It should clearly be Rachel Reeves. She needs to get behind this agenda. I think it needs to be just elevated up from a sort of subdivision of the waste agenda to be a kind of serious cross-governmental agenda about how we achieve net zero, of course, because it's about that too, but also about how we tie this in with the productivity and growth agenda. And then if people see that, then I'm really hopeful that we'll start to sort of shift the tax system in a way that will enable lots of circular economy businesses to thrive, and people will start to see the benefits, and we will get into a kind of a virtuous circle.
Totally.
Indeed. But for my last thoughts, I would say we've discussed how the circular economy has many different ways of interacting with us as citizens and businesses. It can help alleviate cost of living issues. It creates jobs, builds in resilience, and it also helps to save the planet by those hard to abate carbon emissions associated with things like food and clothes and buildings and those kinds of things where it's difficult to flick a switch, and requires behavior change. So it has business models that enables us as citizens and businesses to change our behavior without feeling too much friction, or to use Shaun's wonderful phrase, without having to wear an environmental hair shirt. So I think cities are at the front end of this, and I think it's appropriate that we've had this discussion in London Climate Action Week. It wasn't supposed to be during an election campaign. We were thinking about it being the run-up to an election, so we've had to be a bit more circumspect about how we deal with that, but I think we've done that very well. And I want to really thank Sarah, Shaun, for your contribution. I'm really touched that you have found the time. You're two stellar individuals. I know that you're in demand, so I do thank you very much, and I thank our wonderful audience for the questions. We'll try and answer the questions that you posed. Won't leave them there, but from everybody, big thank you. Enjoy London Climate Action Week, and see you all anon. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.